Hello and welcome to another live. I'm Jamie from ESL Teacher 365, and today I'm going to be sharing some of my teach abroad mistakes and regrets. I first taught abroad in Costa Rica in 2007. I'm currently in Australia, and I've had a lot of regrets through my teach abroad process and journey, and I've made a lot of mistakes. So hopefully I can share these with you so you don't make the same. I would love to know where you are from and where you want to teach. If you're joining us live, you can leave a comment down below. And if you're catching up on the replay, I would like to know this as well. I'm always very curious about where people are looking to teach and where you're from. So just leave a comment. Let's get started with the mistakes. My first mistake might surprise you because I actually do a lot of TEFL course reviews on this channel, but my first mistake is not doing a TEFL course. I actually taught abroad for 7 years without doing a TEFL course, and this may seem a bit strange, but I studied Spanish. I'm a certified Spanish teacher in the US. And because I had that teaching license, I didn't have to have a TEFL for a lot of the programs and ways that I was teaching. So if you are a certified teacher, you might not need a TEFL certificate, but I still recommend it. This is because in a TEFL course, you're going to learn a lot of very specific techniques on how to teach grammar and vocabulary to learners that are learning English as their second or foreign language. And yeah, I really wish that I had done mine sooner. A TEFL course is good for life. So if you're thinking about teaching abroad, you can definitely do it earlier on in your career, then you kind of have it out of the way. You don't have to worry about it. Some people do a basic TEFL course first, maybe one of the cheaper ones, just to see if it's something that you would enjoy. And then as you go through your journey, you might want to upgrade to something like CELTA in the future. But that is totally up to you. I know that everyone's teach abroad goals can be very different. If you haven't done a TEFL course yet and you would like a recommendation, in the video description, I should have a link to my survey. I recommend filling that out, and then I will email you back with some links and tips for which TEFL courses I recommend, and then other tips for getting started on your teach abroad journey. There are a lot of different TEFL courses out there, so just as kind of basic advice, the really cheap TEFL courses are not good for teaching abroad. A lot of them won't be accredited, so some of those can be used for online teaching, but if you're interested in moving abroad, going to another country to teach, I don't recommend those. I recommend doing at least a mid-level to a higher level TEFL course, so typically a 120-hour TEFL course or a level 5 one. But again, not all 120-hour TEFL courses are the same. There are some that are kind of scammy, kind of cheap, just the information that you read through and some pretty easy quizzes. I don't recommend those. I always recommend getting one with some teaching practice so that you're better prepared for the classroom. I was teaching in Spain. I was teaching kids, and I was able to take some of the techniques that I learned from teaching Spanish and it translated to the English classroom. But later on, when I was teaching adults, I definitely was very grateful that I had that TEFL because we were doing a lot of different vocabulary exercises, and just methods of teaching grammar and things like that to adults was very different. I did a CELTA course as my TEFL course, and since then I have gone on to test out a bunch of different ones. I'm trying to make my way through all of the courses so that I can have a better way to recommend them to you. So get your TEFL course. That's my first recommendation. My second mistake is not standing up for myself. This could be because you're working in a school environment. You're going to have a lot of different coworkers, maybe you have co-teachers, but this can also be a bit due to cultural differences. You're working in another country and They are going to see different things in a different way, have a different perspective, have different opinions, different ways that they're used to doing something than you do. And this can cause some issues. To give you some more specific examples, I was teaching as an assistant in a Spanish school, a Spanish primary school, and I was supposed to be helping with the lessons, the grammar, the vocabulary. I was working with small groups and helping them practice their conversation skills. And one of the teachers had me doing things that they weren't related to the class. It was, oh, can you make something for this other class? Or can you make something for as a prank, as a joke for my husband? Like very strange things. And I should have said no. I should have said, that's not why I'm here. That's not what I'm doing. But at the same time, I didn't want to upset her. I wanted to have a good working relationship. But I do wish that I had stood up for myself more and said, no, that's out of the scope of what I'm supposed to be doing. I'm here as a language assistant. I'm supposed to be supporting the kids that are learning English, helping you with your lessons, not doing whatever random personal stuff that you want me to be doing. It's going to be difficult, especially if the culture is quite different. Obviously, you don't want to offend people. You need to be a bit careful. But if there's something that makes you uncomfortable, you need to say something about it. Another example would be working with co-teachers again. I didn't have this issue as much when I was the only teacher, but if you're working as a language assistant or as a co-teacher, this is kind of where issues happen. So maybe my co-teacher had a very different way of behavior management in the classroom, and I didn't feel comfortable with it. And I wish that I had said something and, said, oh my gosh, this makes me feel uncomfortable. Can I manage the class the way that I feel comfortable instead? It's a fine line. So just go into it knowing that you may have to stand up for yourself at some point, and I recommend doing that. My third mistake has to do with materials. Going abroad, I expected that the schools would have materials, but this isn't always the case. In Costa Rica, I worked at a community center, and the only materials that we had were a few books, a few papers, a whiteboard, and that was pretty much it. We didn't have any way to really print things. So this is very, very basic, and I was teaching all different levels. I was teaching young kids, adults. The class sizes luckily were quite small, but just going there and expecting them to have something, but suddenly I need to come up with all of these ideas. Luckily, there's a lot of resources online these days of different ways you can teach games and activities without a lot of materials, but just go in that you might not have anything. Other schools that I worked at on the other end of the spectrum, I worked at an American school in Spain, and we had access to everything. We could actually order things from the secretary. You could say, okay, I need these materials for an art project, or I'd like to create a book and have it printed. But international schools typically have very high budgets. They're very expensive private schools typically. So in that case, yes, we had a smart board, we had a computer, all of that good stuff. It really is going to depend on the type of school where you're working. In Australia, I worked at an English language school. We also had access to a projector and a board, our computer. Actually, we had TV screens. We didn't have projectors in my second school. We had like TV screens, which was a bit weird because it was a bit small to see. But we also could print materials, and some of the students had books. You will find when you teach abroad that if you're working in public schools or maybe private schools as well, they'll often have books, but you want to supplement those books with extra additional activities, of course, not just going through the book. But that's something too. It depends on the country. They may want you to do a certain number of pages every week, and you kind of have to fit in your games and activities for practice around their curriculum and around their schedule. Teaching abroad is all about being very flexible, being able to communicate with people that you're working with, but it can be tricky at times. I recommend getting a subscription to Canva, and they actually have a Canva for Educators, which is free, and that's going to give you access to more things. When you're teaching abroad, if you can get some sort of teacher ID or maybe you get an email address for your school, you can use that and send it to Canva, and then you will qualify for that Canva for Educators. There is a free version as well. It's a little bit limited, and there's also a pro version that you can test out too. But definitely get Canva. You can create worksheets on it. You can make flashcards, presentations. You can show videos. It's kind of a teacher's best friend. I really wish that it had been around when I was first teaching. It would have saved a lot of time of lesson planning and material creation. But it's definitely a great tool. Another mistake is not dealing with problems right away. Maybe you see something happening with your students in your class, or something's happening with your coworkers, and you kind of just let it slide. I don't recommend that. I really wish that in some situations I had dealt with the problem right away. To give you an example, I was teaching in Australia. I was teaching a test prep course for adults. This was a more advanced level, and I had a student in it who basically said very inappropriate things during one of the speaking activities. And I overheard him, and I'm pretty sure he was saying these things kind of just to bother me. That's just kind of his personality. But instead of saying something then and there, I just kind of let it slide for a little bit. And then later on, we did have additional problems, and eventually I did have to go to the admin, and he was removed from my course. But I wish that after that those first comments, that I had said something right away, like, that's not acceptable, get out of my class. And then it just would have solved a lot of the problems earlier. A lot of the other students were also bothered by just the way he was acting in class, and it was difficult for them to focus, and they were all trying to pass a difficult exam. So it wasn't really fair to them. I recommend, if you're having some sort of issue with your students, definitely pull them aside after class. And unless it's something, completely inappropriate that you need to deal with right away, but pull them aside after class, talk to them, see what's going on. Often it's something at home, or it could be something deeper, but you might need to get the admin involved as well, or if you have a co-teacher or other people that work with that student. If you have an issue with a coworker, you might need to go to the admin or talk to that coworker, but do it right away. It will make it a lot easier. Another mistake is not having a solid retirement plan, and this can be very difficult when teaching abroad. There's a lot of fantastic things that come with teaching abroad, but saving for retirement is more complicated. This is because sometimes, as part of your contract, you'll get money towards your retirement. Often you won't, and you'll kind of have to set that up on your own. This is not legal advice. I definitely recommend talking to a financial advisor, but in some cases, you might not be able to send money to retirement accounts if you're abroad. So for example, Americans, you can't really have an IRA if you are abroad. You would have to have that in the US, but you can't have that if you're living abroad unless you opened it before you left. So it's a bit of a gray area, and it does get quite tricky. So I recommend reaching out for help from a professional who understands what it's like to live in other countries, but also have ties back to your country too. This will depend on where you are from and also where you are teaching. But this is something that I wish that I had really looked at earlier. I was very focused on traveling as much as possible and really experiencing everything, but not so worried about saving until later on in my journey. So start earlier, and of course it will compound, and it's better the earlier that you start and if you have it all set up. Of course, you don't have to teach abroad for years and years and years. Maybe you just go abroad for 1 year or two, then it's not so much of an issue. But if this is going to be your career, this is something that you will need to look into, and sooner rather than later. Before we get into the regrets, I just want to let you know that I will be doing some Black Friday bundles this year. I have 2 different bundles for Teach Abroad, and I will have one for teaching online. And the way to learn about what these bundles are, what they include, and all of the details is to get on my email list. My email list, I send out a weekly email. I have a Teach Abroad list and a Teach Online list, so you can get on both. Those will usually be different emails, but sometimes there's some overlap. So if you go to courses.eslteacher365.com/email-list, you can get on there and you will be the first to know about Black Friday deals. Often I give out free things as well through my list. It's just the best place to be. I am doing limited bundles this year, so when they sell out, they've sold out, and you'll want to get on that list so you know all of the details. And if you have any questions as we go through, I will do questions at the end. So just leave a comment with your questions and I will get to them at the end after our regrets. My first regret is not getting more involved in the school community. This happened when I didn't live near my school. So maybe I lived in Madrid, but my school was in a suburb and I had to take the metro or take a bus about 40 minutes to get to my school. So that just meant that after school, I was pretty much getting out of there, and I really wish that I had maybe stayed around. I know there were some after-school programs at some of the schools, and maybe I could have helped with some of the events or volunteered, gotten to know the families a bit better. I got to know the students really well, but I think it's important if you're teaching to be part of that school community. When I taught adults, we often did different activities outside of class. That you do have to be a bit careful with. With adults, you still want to maintain that you are a teacher and an authority figure and not their friend. So that can be a little bit tricky, but with kids, it can be easier if you're getting to know their families. One way that I got to know some families was doing private tutoring. I would tutor the kids after school and get to know their families. And that was really nice too, just as far as integrating into the culture and learning about the culture and having someone to talk to and ask questions, maybe the family members. So that's another good way, but I do regret not making more of an effort to become part of that school community. Another regret is not documenting student work. When you are teaching, they're going to be doing different essays, or maybe they're doing worksheets or presentations. Maybe you have them do their own PowerPoint, projects, things like that. What you should do is document these things, videos, photos, and then you can use them to create a portfolio of student work. This can be really helpful when you're looking for other positions. You can show the work that your students have done, but you always want to make sure that you have permission to do this. With adult students, this is easier. You can ask them. With kids, you might want to ask their parents or ask the school, ask their teacher. But get it in writing, just have them sign something that says that they're okay with you showing the student work. Maybe you don't include their name. You don't want to necessarily include photos of them, but it could be a scanned copy of their worksheet or their essay. This is going to help you show future employers kind of the things that you've done already in your classes and the quality of your assignments and projects. And I did do this when I was student teaching. We had to create a portfolio. I don't know why I didn't do this afterwards. I should have been documenting all of my student work after that, but that's a big regret because I've worked with so many different students in different schools and different countries and don't have much to show for it because I didn't really document very much. So definitely take some time and document your students' work. Another regret isn't necessarily about the teaching aspect, but it is about living abroad and being abroad away from your family and your friends. I do regret not keeping in touch with people back home, or at least not making more of an effort. When you're teaching abroad, it is normal to lose friends because it can be very difficult with the time difference and everything. And people get busy, you're off doing exciting things, and maybe they're kind of in their day-to-day life that you left behind. So it can make it difficult to connect, but that just means that it's a bit more on you. You need to be the one reaching out. You need to be the one that is making that effort. But at the same time, if you're not seeing that reciprocated, then it's time to let that friendship go or let that relationship go. Luckily, these days, it's a lot easier to stay in contact with video calls and all of that. Some of the places I taught abroad, we didn't have internet. We had to walk like 40 minutes to get to an internet cafe just to be able to send an email, or I could call my family once a month, something like that. So luckily these days it is easier to keep in touch, but just know that it does take effort and it is a bit on you. You're the one that left, you're the one having all these exciting adventures. So make that effort. It's definitely worth it. Another regret I have is not creating a system to reuse your lessons. I've found that in my time teaching abroad, that I've often changed levels and classes, but at the same time, I've also taught maybe the same class, but or the same level, but 3 different classes, or maybe I taught that same level, but just at a different school. I wish that I had maybe use something like Google Drive to organize that a bit. So had certain lessons and put the level that it was for, maybe the grammar point that it was covering or the vocabulary set that it was covering. I also taught some science and art classes in English. I wish I had organized those activities. That would have saved me a lot of time for lesson planning. Then I wouldn't have had to just come up with new ideas all the time. That is a very exhausting part of teaching, is all of the lesson planning, coming up with new ideas. You're always trying to find something that fits your students best, but it's really nice to have a whole bunch of materials that you can use. Some schools that I worked at, they did allow us to share all of our work with the other teachers. We had a common place where we would keep different lessons and presentations we created, worksheets we created, and you could share with everyone. That was amazing. That saved so much time on lesson planning. Other schools, the teachers were very secretive. They only kind of prepared stuff for their classes. They didn't really talk about what they were doing in their classes. They didn't share anything. And I think that comes down to maybe that the teachers would get they would get into higher levels or better positions depending on how they were teaching. So I guess maybe they thought, oh, I don't want to share anything because that way I can be promoted, which was kind of a toxic culture. I didn't really like working there. Everyone was always very quiet in the teacher's room and working on their own things. Just know that teaching abroad, you might have a community where everyone shares. You might have that situation where not everyone does. But if at least you have your own system for keeping everything organized, then that will help a lot and allow you to spend less time on lesson planning. My last regret is not starting my blog and YouTube channel sooner. As teachers, traditionally, we don't have the best salaries. So a great way to monetize that is to start a blog or to start a YouTube channel. And this also just helps other teachers learn what it's like to teach in that country, or maybe you really like lesson creation or material creation. You can share some of those things on your blog. Maybe you can sell some of your lessons. It's just something that I enjoy. I know other teachers enjoy, but it can be a little bit intimidating to get started. But I do recommend that every teacher have at least a blog, if not a YouTube channel. If I had started this sooner, obviously it would be bigger than it is now, and I could have helped more teachers. But if you're interested in starting one, I say just go for it. I started my first blog. It was more like a travel blog, kind of my thoughts about living and teaching abroad, not necessarily for teachers, but for people who like to travel. And I eventually closed that. I started a YouTube channel kind of along the same path of sharing what it's like to live abroad, closed that. And then I decided I realized that I was passionate about helping teachers and I wanted to have resources on my blog and start a YouTube channel about it. So definitely if it's something that you would like to do as a side hustle, I say go for it. Okay, let's get into some questions. I'll take a look and see what we have. All right, we've got some people from the US today. Okay, oh, I see a good question here. So English with Adam says, I have a TESL cert. Do I need a TEFL course also? No, you do not. TESL and TEFL are essentially the same. You don't need to have two different certificates. Some countries will say TESL, like Australia, because if you're teaching here, you are teaching foreigners, but in an English-speaking country. If you're teaching in a place like Spain, that would be considered TEFL. That's a non-native English-speaking country, so they're learning English as a foreign language. But you don't need both. One is enough. All right, let's see some other comments. Lesson planning and material creation is something that takes a ton of work, but I'm dedicated to get the ball rolling. It is very difficult to get started when you've just done your TEFL certificate or you've just gotten your teaching license. You've had a bit of practice, but not much, honestly. I learned so much from working with other teachers and looking at their lessons, even looking at how they manage their classes, maybe looking at their lesson plans, talking with them. I do recommend if you're a new teacher asking to observe some lessons of some of the top teachers in your school if you have any breaks in your schedule. You will learn so much from them, and then maybe afterwards you can talk to them about the lesson, ask them any questions that you have. That's your biggest tool is veteran teachers. You're going to learn the most from them. They've been doing this forever, and they really should have like an apprentice system where you kind of go under the wing of a veteran teacher. It definitely helps. Okay, let's see. Martha has a question. Were you allowed to teach at a school and offer private tutoring as well? For private tutoring, this is really common in Spain. So you're only teaching, if you're doing a language assistant program, you're only teaching like I taught 26 hours per week, and you might have a day off per week. You might have a shorter day. So some schools will actually allow you to tutor during your lunch break or after school. And in some cases, if they don't allow that, you can always tutor other people in the community after school, on the weekends, whatever you'd like. You do have to be a bit careful with your visa, but for these language assistant programs, you typically have a visa that allows you to work up to 30 hours per week on a student visa. So if you're teaching 12 hours per week at your school, you still have a lot of hours that you can do private teaching too. Okay. Let's see. I've been tutoring students online for 2 years and I have a bachelor's degree in liberal arts. I'm interested in teaching abroad. I really like your channel. Thanks, Adam. That's exciting that you've been doing 2 years online. That's a lot of great experience. And yes, go abroad as well. So Rosie says, I don't have a degree, but I'm going to go teach in Spain next year. I'm going to school to get my level 5 cert TESL. I'm wondering what your experience is with this. So yes, if you don't have a degree and you want to teach in Spain, typically what you'll need to do if you don't have EU citizenship is get a student visa, and then you'll get that 30 hours of working rights with your visa. So people will do either a Spanish language course or do a TEFL course. And then after that, you might look for jobs at academies. You might do private tutoring. You can also look for companies, like in-company classes. You can do that as well. Okay. So if there are any other questions, just let me know. You can add them down below. And for anyone joining in late, just a reminder to get on my email list. So it's the ESL Teacher 365 Insiders email list. I'll put up the link again. Here's the link. So courses.eslteacher365.com/email-list. And I give out different tips on this list. If I have any promotions or discounts, oftentimes I work with TEFL courses and they'll do giveaways. I'm always sharing things that are specific to teaching abroad and teaching online. So I hope that you join the list, and I will be sharing all of the Black Friday deals there too. Okay, Rosie has another question. How you went about making friends when you live abroad? Yes, this is a good question, a big topic. When living abroad, in my experience, one of the best ways is either to live with a host family or to get a language exchange partner or to live with locals. So I lived with a host family in Costa Rica. I also did one when I was studying in Spain. And then when I lived in Spain, I lived with locals. In France, that was at a camp. So we had different counselors from all over the world. Some were French and then some were English speaking. In Australia, it's been more difficult because I haven't had that kind of pull of like, I want to learn the language and everything, and I live with my husband. So that's been probably the hardest place. But in Spain, I went and did a lot of different activities. I signed up for dance classes. I would do meetups. I would do hiking. I would go to concerts. Sometimes I would hang out with some of the other English teachers, but a lot of times I was meeting people through my roommates who were Spanish. I had a French language exchange partner. I had a Spanish language exchange partner. And these were people my age that we would meet up and go to a coffee shop and then practice the language for, maybe 30 minutes Spanish, 30 minutes English or whatever. We'd go for a walk and practice our languages together. But that was a really good way to learn about the culture, learn about activities that were going on, participate in things. And these days with Meetup, you can pretty much search for any of your interests and, go there. But my big tip is to get a calendar and choose something new that you want to try each month. Put it on your calendar, make it, something that you really want to do. Maybe it's an experience that you wouldn't have the opportunity to do back home, but make it a priority. That's going to be the easiest way. It's really easy to just stay in your room and it's kind of scary out there, but you need to put yourself out there. You need to try things. When I was in Egypt, I was there actually on a scholarship, and I was there through Rotary International. So that was like a built-in friend network. I went to different Rotary clubs, and they have youth Rotary clubs as well, and they would invite me to different activities. But Egyptians in general are super welcoming, super generous, very friendly. So that culture was so easy to make friends, almost to the point where I had people calling me constantly saying, "How are you? Do you want to do something?" And I'd actually have to turn my phone off because I was so exhausted from everything that I was doing. But it really depends on where you're teaching. Some cultures are easier to get into, to make friends. Other cultures, it can be a little bit more difficult. So can depend on where you're teaching. Okay. Are there any online groups that you would recommend to connect with other people? That's a question from Costa. Um, Online groups for TEFL teaching, yes, there's a lot of Facebook groups. If you're wanting to connect with locals, you can also, like, say you're teaching in Madrid, there's going to be Madrid groups where maybe it's Madrid hiking or dance classes or whatever. But if you want to connect with people that are teaching abroad, there are a ton of TEFL groups on Facebook. You can search like TEFL teachers in Japan or in South Korea, and you can learn from people who are there, people who taught there before, people wanting to go there. Those are really good places. Rosie says, last question, I promise. Is there any tutoring you do for teachers privately to help them through their journey? Yes, I actually do offer coaching. I have a lot of people who want to get started with teaching abroad or even just teaching in general and want to go over lesson planning and things like that. So yes, I do have coaching that I do. I also have a membership called Teach Abroad Club, which hint, hint, is opening again for Black Friday. So get on my email list and you can check out all the details with that. But that's like a little community that I have where I help people through the Teach Abroad process, and you can ask any questions that you have and everything. So there should be some details in the video description. If not, you can send me an email. I will put my email here. And that's a good way to connect with me as well. All right. So my email is jamie@eslteacher365.com if you have any questions or want to connect. Okay, I hope that this live was helpful, learning about some of my mistakes, some of my regrets, and I will have another live coming up. I believe it's next week. That will be questions, so a Q&A. I will be asking my email list and also social media for questions that you have about teaching abroad, and I will collect them all together and then be answering all of your questions next week. Thanks so much for joining me either live or if you're catching up on the replay. And as always, happy teaching. Have a great day or evening, wherever you are.